Smoke rose from the charred remains of what used to be a scout transport. The battlefield was silent except for distant rumbles of artillery and the crackling fires that ate through broken hulls. Cade moved slowly across the rocky terrain, his boots crunching on broken metal and scorched earth. His armor was scratched, dirty, and dented, but he still moved like a man with a mission. He had no sympathy left for the enemy. The war between humans and the Xelari had lasted too long. Every skirmish blurred into the next. Orders were simple now: secure the valley, no prisoners, eliminate threats. Cade's squad was already gone, picked off during the earlier ambush. Now he was alone, and he preferred it that way. There was no one left to question his decisions. As he scanned the debris, something moved. Just a twitch barely noticeable. He raised his rifle instantly and approached with caution. Among the wreckage, half buried under what looked like part of a collapsed transport wall, lay a figure. Not fully armored and clearly not dead. The blue skin told him everything he needed to know. A Xelari female. She tried to crawl, her leg dragging uselessly behind her. Her armor was sleek and silver, but cracked open along one side. Her long white hair was tangled and dusty, but even in this broken state, she looked strangely regal. Cade stepped closer, watching her hands shake as she tried to push herself up. He could see she was not armed. She looked up and froze. Their eyes met for the first time. Hers were wide and terrified, shining like polished glass. Cade felt something twist in his chest. He quickly reminded himself of the orders. She was the enemy. She was a threat. She had to be put down. And yet, she wasn't attacking. She wasn't even begging. She simply stared at him in silence, his jaw clenched. With a swift move, he stepped in and kicked her injured leg. He expected a scream, a curse, anything to remind him she was a warrior. But she didn't cry out. She simply gasped softly and turned her face away, her hand gripping the dust in pain. A single tear slid down her cheek. That was all. That one tear hit him harder than any weapon. He lowered his foot and took a step back. The rifle in his hand suddenly felt heavier. She hadn't fought. She hadn't cursed him. She had just wept quietly. That was not the reaction of a trained soldier playing for sympathy. That was real. He cursed under his breath and looked around. No one was watching. No command drones in the sky. No comms in his ear. It was just him and her. A wounded alien girl who wasn't fighting back. His orders echoed in his mind again. But so did the sound of her breath, shallow and trembling. Something wasn't right. I should finish this, he muttered, more to himself than her. But even as he raised the rifle, his fingers didn't want to pull the trigger. She looked up again, meeting his eyes, not with hate, but with a kind of deep sadness. Her lips trembled but made no sound. There was blood on her temple, and her shoulder was dislocated. She couldn't even run. He lowered the rifle slowly and crouched beside her. "What were you doing here?" he asked. She didn't respond. She just looked at the ground. He noticed her hand had been burned badly. Her armor had fused around parts of her wrist. She was a soldier, yes, but now she was just a broken thing in the dirt. "I don't even know your name," he said softly. Still, she said nothing. But she did shift slightly, as if acknowledging that she was listening. Cade reached into his belt and pulled out a small water capsule. He held it out to her without a word. She stared at it for a moment, then took it. With trembling fingers, her hands were soft, not clawed like some of the others. He'd fought dozens of Xelari before, but never seen one like this up close. She looked so young. Her chest rose and fell rapidly as she drank, her gaze never leaving him. He could feel his instincts fighting with his training. This was wrong. All of it. He knew what his commanders would say. He knew what other soldiers would do. But something had changed inside him the moment he saw that tear. That silent pain said more than any scream could. And now he couldn't walk away, not yet. Not until he understood what really happened here. Cade stared at her for a long moment, while the sky above remained silent. He could hear distant rumbling, maybe thunder or maybe war machines moving again. The Xelari girl still sat slouched, both hands around the half-empty water capsule. Her silver armor caught the soft light as wind brushed her white hair across. Her face, she looked more like a statue than a fighter. He checked his surroundings again. The rocky ridge shielded them from the west, but there was still open view from above. He hadn't seen any patrol drones for at least 10 minutes. Still, he knew time was running out. Sooner or later, someone would scan this zone. If they caught him aiding an enemy, he would be labeled a traitor. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked before the words formed. She coughed and placed the water capsule down on the dirt carefully, like it was fragile. Cade noticed how careful she was, not out of fear, but as if she had been taught respect even in pain. The way her fingers moved showed training, maybe royal or ceremonial. "What's your name?" he asked again, softer this time. She looked at him, opened her mouth, then hesitated. Her lips moved, shaping something silent before she found her. "Strength, 0, she whispered. The name lingered in the air like something sacred, foreign yet beautiful. Cade nodded slowly, repeating it in his mind. 0 tried to sit up straighter, but winced in pain. Her injured leg couldn't move properly, and her left arm barely responded. Cade looked at her armor and noticed how the joints were locked around the damage. It was advanced gear, likely made for someone important. She wasn't a regular foot soldier. She might be a high-value captive. His instincts screamed to call command, to report her and request evac for collection. But he didn't move. Something about the moment felt too human to ruin with cold protocol. Her face was tired, but there was something strong behind her silence. She hadn't begged. She hadn't cursed him. She had simply endured. 0 pointed weakly toward the east where smoke rose in columns. "Crash site," she said. "We weren't attacking. We were running." Cade looked in that direction, eyes narrowing. "Running from what?" he asked. She blinked, then spoke one word. "Purge." The sound of it chilled him even in the dry desert heat. The word meant nothing to most humans, but Cade had read deeper reports. Purge squads weren't just for killing enemies. They were for erasing mistakes, eliminating witnesses. If her people had turned on her own crew, it meant something political. Something dangerous. Maybe even something that involved him now. Why? "Were they purging you?" he asked. 0 shook her head. "Saw something we weren't meant to. They called it a divine breach. They said we were unclean." Her eyes shimmered with pain, not from injury but memory. "They killed my sisters. I was the only one who crawled away." Her voice broke slightly as she looked down again. Cade stood in silence. He had seen horror during this war, but this wasn't about battlefields anymore. It was about something bigger, deeper. He wondered what truth she had witnessed. What was worth silencing an entire crew? And why now, in the middle of a collapsing conflict, they were still hiding it? He placed his rifle on the ground slowly, never taking his eyes off her. "Can you walk if I help you?" he asked. 0 looked at him with hesitation, then gave a small nod. He reached forward and carefully placed one arm around her back. She was light, almost too light, as if she hadn't eaten in days. Her body trembled against his armor. He lifted her with effort, avoiding the injured leg. She groaned but didn't complain. Her grip tightened on his shoulder as he steadied her. The connection felt strange. An enemy in his arms, but no alarms blared, no gunshots rang. Just a quiet understanding between two broken warriors in the middle of a forgotten valley. Together they moved toward the rocky ledge. Each step was slow and difficult. Cade's boots crunched on shattered stone while 0 leaned on him for balance. He could hear her breath, shallow and controlled. Every Few seconds, she winced but made no sound. She was trained to survive, but barely holding on. Cade guided her behind the rocks into a narrow crevice just wide enough to shelter them. He set her down gently and took out a field med kit. Zero didn't resist as he cut open her armor at closer. The joint to examine the damage. Her skin was scorched in places, bruised and raw. He applied salve without a word. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Why are you helping me?" Cade didn't answer immediately. He wrapped the bandage around her arm and stared at her hands. "Because you didn't scream," he said finally. "Because someone has to care when no one else does." She opened her eyes and looked at him without blinking. Her voice was soft. "Then I won't forget you, human." The words carried weight, and Cade knew in that moment he had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The night was creeping in, and the desert air had begun to turn cold. Cade sat with his back to the rock, watching the sky change from pale orange to a deep purple. The silence felt heavier now. Zero lay beside him, breathing slower, her body wrapped in his emergency thermal sheet. She hadn't spoken in over an hour, and he didn't push her to. He kept checking the perimeter. He didn't trust this calm. The war never allowed peace for long. Somewhere beyond those hills, machines were still grinding, and orders were still being shouted. He had disobeyed a direct command by not killing her. That alone could get him executed if found, but she wasn't a threat. Not anymore. She had no weapon, no strength to run. Her body was broken, but her spirit was something else. He had never seen such control. She didn't complain. She didn't cry again. She just lay still, conserving energy like a true survivor. Cade reached into his pack and took out a protein bar. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. He broke it in half and placed one piece in her hand. She blinked, looked down, then took it slowly. She didn't thank him, but she nodded once. That was enough for him. The fire he made was small and hidden behind stone. Just enough to keep them warm and invisible. Zero stared into the flames. Her face soft in the glow. "Do you believe in oaths?" she asked suddenly. Her voice was low but clear. Cade looked at her, unsure how to respond. "I believe in promises," he said, "and breaking them." She nodded at that and shifted slightly, adjusting the blanket around her shoulder. "In my culture, when someone saves a warrior in disgrace, they share fate. If one dies, both must follow." Her words were heavy with meaning. Cade didn't answer right away. He wasn't sure if she was warning him or thanking him. The lines were blurry now. She was still Xelari, but not the kind he had trained to kill. There was no malice in her eyes, only memories. She had seen things he hadn't. She had survived something worse than battle. "What did you see?" he finally asked. Zero's jaw tightened. "It wasn't meant for us. The thing inside that vault, it wasn't made by my people. It wasn't made by yours either. It was old, ancient, wrong." Her hands gripped the edges of the thermal sheet tighter as she spoke. "We were guarding it, my unit, but someone wanted it removed. I heard the screams before I saw the light. We tried to seal it again, but it was too late. Our commanders turned on us, said we had been corrupted. I ran. I wasn't supposed to survive." Her voice didn't break, but her eyes betrayed the weight. Cade's breath slowed. He had heard stories of ancient weapons, precursor tech, forbidden zones, but hearing it from her made it feel real. Not just rumors told in hushed tones. If she was telling the truth, then someone had opened something dangerous, and now they wanted silence. "Why did you trust me?" he asked. Zero looked at him with tired eyes. "Because you didn't laugh, you didn't mock. You didn't act like a monster." She turned her face slightly toward the fire again. "Because you looked at me like I was a person, not a thing to destroy." Her voice remained steady. Cade didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. He just stared into the fire with her, letting the silence stretch. His thoughts were no longer clear. Everything about this war felt different now. She had given him something he hadn't expected: doubt. The wind howled through the rocks, carrying dust and the scent of smoke from distant wreckage. Zero finally closed her eyes and leaned against the stone wall behind her. Her breathing was softer now. Rest was reaching for her, and he didn't stop it. She needed sleep more than answers. He stood and kept watch as the stars appeared one by one. They were far from safe. But in that quiet gap between duty and betrayal, something human was blooming. Not love, not yet, but something like understanding. And maybe that was rarer than victory in this war. He knew that when the sun rose again, choices would have to be made. But for tonight, he chose to stay by her side. When morning came, the air was cold and the sky clear. Cade didn't sleep. He had kept watch the whole night, listening for movement, scanning shadows, staying ready. Zero was still sleeping when the sun touched the rocks. Her body curled under the thermal sheet, her breathing calm and quiet. Cade stood and stretched his arms, feeling the stiffness in his muscles. He didn't know how long they could stay hidden. He needed to move, find shelter, and figure out the next step. There were too many questions and no time to answer them. He glanced down at Zero and wondered if she could even walk. She stirred. When the light warmed her face, her eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the brightness. Her lips were dry, and she blinked a few times before looking at him. There was no fear in her face now. Only a tired calmness, as if she had accepted something deep inside. "Morning," he said quietly. She nodded and pushed herself up, groaning from the pain in her leg. Cade knelt beside her and checked the bandage. The injury was still swollen, but there was no sign of infection. She was lucky, though she didn't look like she believed it. "You can't walk far like this," he said. "We need transport, or at least a signal." Zero looked toward the hills. "There's a relay station. South Ridge. If it's not destroyed." Her voice was rough, but steady. Cade knew the place. It was risky, but it might work. He packed the gear quickly and helped her stand. She leaned on him again, her balance shaky, her breath short. But she didn't complain. She simply took the pain and moved forward, one slow step at a time. Together they climbed the slope, each footstep leaving a mark in the dusty soil. View from the top showed them the ruined stretch of valley ahead. Smoke still drifted in the distance, and broken machines lay scattered like bones. Cade studied the terrain, remembering old patrol paths, estimating danger zones. He knew they had to avoid open ground. They started moving carefully, using rocks for cover, avoiding drone routes. Cade supported Zero's weight as much as he could. Her armor was heavier than it looked, and her body trembled with each step. But she didn't slow down. She kept her eyes forward, silent and determined. At midday, they reached a dry trench that led toward the South Ridge. Cade checked his scanner. No signals yet. Zero collapsed near the edge of the trench, breathing hard. He gave her water and sat beside her. She looked at him with something new in her eyes. "Trust. You saved me," she said. "You didn't have to." Cade shrugged. "Maybe I needed to save someone. Maybe I didn't want to follow orders anymore." She smiled faintly, a small curve of her lips. It was the first smile he had seen from her, and it hit him harder than her silence ever did. "I was raised to hate humans," she said. "Taught they were cruel, empty, only out for control." She paused. "But you gave me water, you stayed, you listened." Cade looked away, unsure how to carry the weight of her words. "I was raised to hate you too," he said quietly. She reached out and touched his arm. Just a light press of her fingers on the metal of his armor. "Then maybe we're both broken," she said. Cade looked back at her and nodded once. Maybe being broken was the only way to see things clearly. Maybe being broken let them choose something different. They rested for a while before moving again. The terrain became rougher, the rocks sharper. Zero slipped once and nearly fell, but Cade caught her. She gritted her teeth and kept going. He admired her strength, not the kind that came from training, but the kind born from survival. By late afternoon, they spotted the relay tower. It was bent and scorched, but parts of it still stood. Cade moved ahead to check it while Zero waited. Behind the ridge. He climbed up carefully, checking the control panel. It sparked once, then hummed softly. It still had power. He adjusted the signal settings and sent a short-range ping. Not to human command, but to a neutral relay satellite. Anonymous, untraced. A distress beacon, coded in old emergency protocol. He didn't know who would hear it. He only hoped it wasn't the wrong people. When he returned to Zero, she looked up at him with tired eyes. "You didn't report me, did you?" she asked. Cade shook his head. "No, I sent a general call. No names, no sides." She relaxed slightly and leaned back against the stone. "Thank you again," she whispered. Cade sat beside her as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in golden fire. He didn't speak, neither did she. The silence between them now felt warm, not empty. Something real was forming in the space between two enemies who no longer wanted to fight. They remained under the rocky ridge as night crept in again. The faint whir of wind turbines in the broken relay tower gave a soft hum in the background. Cade checked the beacon signal one more time. It was still pulsing every 2 minutes, waiting for someone to respond. Zero had eaten the last of the rations he had offered her. She didn't eat much. Her hands were still shaking, and the color under her skin looked pale and bruised. She had lost a lot of blood. Cade could see that even. Though she tried to sit tall and act strong. "We can't stay here more than a day," Cade said. "If no one answers, we'll have to move east toward the ravine. There's an old outpost near the cliffs." Zero didn't argue. She simply nodded and lowered her head. Her breath came out in short, weak bursts. The climb had cost her strength. He moved beside her, setting down his gear. The fire was small again, hidden under rocks. He used his body to block the light as much as he could. There were still drones in the sky. Any scan could alert both sides to their presence. He had become an enemy to everyone now. Zero looked at him as if reading his mind. "You could leave me here," she said. "No one would blame you." Cade didn't even answer. He tossed a blanket over her shoulders and adjusted the bandage on her arm. "We started this together. I'm not walking away now," he said firmly. She blinked, slowly. Her lips moved like she wanted to say more, but she stayed quiet. The firelight danced across her face. She looked more human in that moment than alien. More wounded than dangerous. More alone than proud. He couldn't explain why, but it mattered to him. They both sat in silence for a while. The stars above blinked into view, one by one. In the stillness, Cade began to wonder what would happen after this. If they survived, if someone came. Could they return to their own sides? Would their people ever accept what had happened here? Zero finally spoke. "If they find me, they will kill me. I carry knowledge that threatens their control." Cade understood now why she didn't beg to be saved. She hadn't expected mercy, only silence. He had broken that silence, and now he was part of her truth. She lifted her eyes toward the sky. "Do your people erase what they fear?" she asked. Cade sighed. "Sometimes they call it protection, safety, security." Zero gave a sad smile. "Ours call it cleansing. Either way, it means death." Her voice faded like the wind over dry stone. The radio beside the fire crackled faintly. Cade leaned in, quickly turning the dial. A voice came through, distorted, unclear, but real. It was a signal. Neutral frequency. A small cargo ship in orbit, responding to his emergency beacon. He raised the mic and answered, "Survivors on surface. 2, no combat, request evac, coordinates locked. He spoke calmly, clearly. The voice confirmed the signal and gave us time, 1 hour, no weapons allowed, unmarked vessel. No questions. Cade looked at Zero. Someone's coming, he said quietly. Zero's face didn't brighten, but her shoulders relaxed slightly. Her head leaned back against the rock, eyes closed. If they take us off-world, what then? She asked. Cade didn't have a plan. He had no answer. But he knew one thing. He wasn't letting her be erased. I don't care what they call me after this, he said. Traitor, deserter, fool, but I won't let them silence you. Zero opened her eyes and met his gaze. Then you'll carry the curse with me. Cade nodded. Let them try to stop us. His voice didn't shake. In the final hour, they packed only the necessary gear. Cade helped her stand again. Her steps were slower now, her face pale and tired. He kept her upright with one arm, leading her across the sand toward the clearing marked by the signal flare. The ship would land there. The wind picked up. Dust swirled across the plain. They reached the spot and waited, standing together, under the open sky. In that moment, they were no longer soldier and enemy. They were just two survivors who had shared something unforgivable to their sides, but unforgettable to each other. The landing ship arrived with little warning, its engines stirring the dust as it came down. It was small and gray, without markings, without flags. Its door opened slowly, and a tall figure stepped out wearing a sealed pilot suit. The faceplate was dark, voice masked, neutral. Cade stepped forward, supporting Zero with one arm. The pilot scanned them both with a handheld device, pausing slightly at Zero's form. The scan beeped once, then turned green. The pilot gave a nod and pointed toward the ramp. No words were exchanged. Just silent agreement. Inside the ship was cold and dim. The walls were lined with crates and folded emergency seating. It wasn't built for comfort. It was built for speed and silence. Zero was guided into a seat and strapped in. Cade sat beside her. Neither of them spoke as the ramp closed. The engines kicked in, lifting them off the cursed world where everything had changed. Cade looked out the side viewport. The valley was shrinking, swallowed by distance. Somewhere down there were broken orders, broken machines, and broken people. He didn't care anymore. Zero's head rested against the seat, her eyes half closed. Her body was weak, her spirit worn, but she was alive. She had been saved. Cade had no idea what kind of future awaited them, but he knew the old one was gone. He had burned that path the moment he chose her over duty. The ship broke through the clouds and entered the upper atmosphere. There was no turbulence, only steady acceleration. Cade checked her pulse again. It was faint but steady. He covered her with a folded heat blanket and leaned back. For the first time in days, he exhaled without tension. The pilot said nothing as the ship moved toward orbit. A new voice came through the comms, robotic and plain. Docking in 30 minutes. No identification needed. Payment received. Cade frowned at the wording. Someone had paid for this flight. Someone wanted them out safely. He leaned toward Zero. Did you contact someone? He asked. Her eyes opened slowly. No, but someone might have been watching. Someone from inside. Not all of us agree with the purge. Her voice was soft, almost distant. Cade wondered how deep this betrayal really went. The pilot veered the ship toward a dark transport carrier floating in orbit. It had no visible flags, no signal tags. Just a docking bay slowly opening. The small ship entered with ease. Inside the carrier was silence. No soldiers. No guards. Just a single medic waiting with a stretcher. They transferred Zero carefully. Cade stayed beside her. The medic didn't ask questions. He applied fluid injections, checked wounds, and scanned her vitals. She needs rest, the medic said. We'll keep her alive, The rest is up to you." Then he turned and walked away. Cade was shown to a cabin small, clean, and private. Zero was taken to another room with medical equipment. For the first time they were apart. Cade sat in silence, staring at the metal walls. He had no command, no mission. Just choices, just memories. Just her. After a few hours, he stepped into the medbay quietly. Zero was asleep, her breathing slow and stable. Her burns were treated, her leg placed in recovery braces. She looked peaceful now. The weight she carried had lifted slightly. Cade pulled a chair beside her bed. He sat there, watching over her. Every scar told a story. Every breath meant resistance. He didn't know what they would become. But he knew this. He didn't regret his choice. Not the silence he broke. Not the laws he ignored. Not even the war he walked away from. When she woke, her eyes met his. "Where are we?" she asked. Cade smiled faintly. "Somewhere safe, for now." She studied his face, looking for doubt. But there was none. Just resolve. Just quiet understanding between a human and the alien. Girl he refused to leave behind. She reached out and touched his hand. "You saved me more than once," she whispered. "Not just from death, from being erased." Cade's grip tightened. "Slightly. And you made me feel human again," he replied. "Not just a soldier, not just a tool. Just a man trying to do what's right." The carrier ship drifted quietly through the dark void between systems. No alarms, no orders, no flags. Cade spent each hour watching over Zero as she healed slowly. She no longer cried in her sleep. Her body had begun to recover, but her mind carried the weight still. She could sit up now and speak without gasping. Her wounds were healing faster than the human medics had expected. The Xelari had efficient biology, especially when calm. Cade brought her simple meals and helped her walk short distances inside the ship. They stayed in their little corner of the vessel, far from the bridge or crew chambers. No one bothered them, no one asked questions. Whoever was behind the ships. Presence clearly wanted them alive, but not tracked. There were no open communications, no networks to trace. One evening, as Zero stood beside the large viewport staring into the stars, she asked quietly, "What happens when we land?" Cade leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "I don't know," he said honestly. "We might be hunted, or forgotten. Or maybe something else." Zero touched the cold glass. "They'll never allow this truth to spread. They'll brand us. Both as liars, as traitors." Cade nodded. "Then we carry the truth for ourselves. Even if no one listens, we carry it anyway." His voice was calm, but firm. He had made peace with his path. The medic came once more and confirmed Zero was stable for travel. Her leg brace would stay, but she could walk without assistance. The pilot told them they'd be dropped off on a civilian outpost near the outer colonies. No questions, no tags. No memory of this ride. When the ship docked, the exit ramp opened into a busy port lit by yellow lamps and echoing voices. Traders, travelers, and repair crews moved through the lanes without pause. No one noticed the human and the alien woman stepping out from the shadows of a silent ship. Cade had changed into simple civilian clothes. Zero wore a cloak over her armor, hiding her skin, and the devices still fused to her suit. They walked with quiet steps, blending in as best they could. The noise and motion felt overwhelming after days in silence. They rented a small room on the edge of the market quarter. It was nothing more than a metal cube with 2 cots and a water unit. But it was theirs. No war outside. No orders inside. For the first time in a long while, they had a place to breathe. Zero sat on the bed and removed the brace carefully. Her leg still hurt, but she moved with more strength now. Cade sat across from her, looking at a small data tablet. I tapped into the local feed. No alerts, no mention of us. "We're still ghosts," he said. Good, she replied. I'm not ready to run again. Her fingers brushed the edges of her burned armor. These marks remind me that I lived. But they also remind me of what I lost. Her voice softened, but didn't break. Her pain was clear, but no longer. In control, Cade leaned forward. You haven't lost everything. You're still here. And I'm still with you. She looked up at him, her pale eyes meeting his. That's what scares me, she said quietly. That someone still stayed. He smiled gently and reached across the space between them. His hand rested on hers. Warm, steady, not forced. Not trained, just human. She didn't pull away. Her fingers closed over his slowly. A bond that had started with pain had turned into something unspoken. They didn't need words for it now. Only presence. They spent the next day preparing quietly. Cade gathered supplies and spoke to a local contact who offered secure transport to a neutral moon. Zeril rested and observed the flow of people in the marketplace. She was learning how to be invisible, but she also saw things others didn't. Whispers in hidden corners. Men with military eyes and civilian coats. Signals passed with a glance. The purge hadn't ended. It had followed them. Cade returned with grim news. There's a price on your name. And mine. Zeril didn't flinch. Then they're afraid. That means the truth still matters, Cade agreed. But we'll need help. People who listen before they shoot. Zeril nodded and pulled her hood up. Then we find them. One by one. Until someone stands with us. Asterisk, the moon they traveled to was cold, quiet, and filled with craters and forgotten tech. The shuttle dropped them in the shadows of an old mining town. No one watched. No one asked questions. The place had no law. Only rules made by those strong enough to enforce them. Cade and Zeril found shelter in a hollowed-out comms tower. Its roof leaked, but it had walls and silence. They used false names and traded gear for supplies. Their faces stayed hidden. Each day they watched, listened, and mapped the flows of those around them. They began to hear stories of others, humans and Xelari, who had gone missing after questioning orders. People who had seen too much. Survivors who didn't belong anywhere. Anymore. Some called them ghosts. Some called them traitors. But others called them proof. Zeril healed fully in body, though the scars remained. She removed the last pieces of her damaged armor and folded them away. Her steps were strong now. Her eyes sharp. She began to speak to people in whispers, trading quiet words for quiet truths. Cade found a message left in a data cache. It was a code he recognized from his old squad. A dead comrade had left it behind before vanishing. The message was short one. Line burned into the screen. Truth lives in the shadows. Find us where the stars don't reach. He showed it to Zeril that night. She read it slowly, then looked at him with calm certainty. They're waiting, she said. Like us. Still. Hiding, still hoping, Cade agreed. Then we go. We find them. And we bring what we saw. What they tried to erase. We bring everything. They gathered what they needed and set off under moonlight. It was not a dramatic escape. No alarms. No chase. Just two people with purpose. Every step was chosen. Every path was hidden. They had become shadows. But inside, they carried fire. In the days that followed, they found old tunnels, silent transmitters, empty bunkers with marks carved into stone, signs, symbols, proof that others had passed through. Some lived, some didn't, but all had tried. And now Cade and Zeril were walking the same path. Eventually they reached a mountain split by time and war. Inside was a chamber filled with forgotten tech, flickering lights, and sleeping servers. At the center stood three figures in worn cloaks, their faces hidden, their voices cautious. But when Zeril spoke, they listened. She told them everything. The purge, the vault, the deaths, the truth. Cade added the reports he had stored, images, logs. blood-soaked records that commanders had deleted from their networks. The rune fell into silence as the final words were shared. The cloaked figures removed their hoods. One was human, one was Xelari. The third was something else, a blend of both. "You're not the first to bring truth," said the human. "But you're the first who brought it together." The Xelari nodded slowly. "And you won't be the last." They gave Cade and Zero a place in their hidden alliance. A small, scattered network of those who remembered, those who resisted lies. Not soldiers, not rebels. Just witnesses. They didn't raise flags. They didn't fight battles. They preserved memory like flame in a storm. Zero took her place among them, not as a survivor, but as a guide. She taught others how to see beyond orders, how to listen, how to endure. Cade worked beside her, training those who had lost everything but still chose to protect what was left of truth. Together, they built something new. Not a home, not a nation, but a quiet rebellion made of stories, scars, and shared trust. It grew slowly, hidden from the stars, untouched by the noise of war, but it grew with purpose. And that was enough. One night, years later, Zero sat outside under a sky full of stars. Cade joined her, sitting in silence beside her. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Her voice was steady. "If you hadn't struck my leg, we wouldn't be here." Cade smiled faintly. "And if you hadn't wept, I wouldn't have stopped." They sat together in the quiet, watching the sky move above them. No more battles, no more orders. Just two souls who had once been enemies, now carrying the same light.